Hello, all you beautiful people out there, and welcome. First of all, I have to apologize for canceling Atheist Church. I had a bitch of a migraine yesterday, and so I apologize for that. And in lieu of that, I decided to come on today and make fun of the Bible. And of course, I'll have more to say about this when I get to it in Saturday Livestream. But I wanted to cover Paul's quote unquote conversion. Hey, Nevermore. And I also wanted to let you know that if it were not for Paul, Christianity would probably be, well, I can't say only Paul. Constantine had a lot to do with it too. So if it weren't for Paul and Constantine, Christianity would probably still be a branch of Judaism, an offshoot of Judaism. But I have a feeling if it weren't for Paul, Constantine never would have heard of Christianity to begin with. So at any rate, so let's get started. His conversion story can be found in Acts chapter 9. And like I said, I will have much more to say about this when I get to it in Saturday Livestream. So Acts 9:1. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Okay, so I've got a question. Why is he asking the high priest in Jerusalem? That doesn't make any sense. The high priest has no... Hey, Lisa. The high priest has no authority whatsoever in Damascus. So why is he going to the high priest? It already doesn't make any sense. It already doesn't make any sense. All right. Verse 3. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. Okay, so let me stop there. Hi, Lisa. I don't know whether I said it before, but hi. Let me stop there. Okay, so there are 3 things this could be, okay? And only 3. It could be a hallucination. It could be that Paul had a psychotic break. Now, he might have been under a lot of stress. Who knows? You know, he might have been thinking, should I really be persecuting these Christians? I mean, after all, they're not really doing anything. And like I said, it already doesn't make any sense that he got permission from the high priest in Jerusalem, because the high priest in Jerusalem has no authority whatsoever over Damascus. So it already doesn't make sense. But moving on from there, he could be so conflicted at this point that it could be a psychotic break. That could happen. And it could happen anytime. It's most likely to happen in your early 20s, but depending upon how conflicted a person is, it can happen anytime. You got to remember that. All right. So, the second thing it could be a stroke. And it has been demonstrated that people who do have strokes in I know, Lisa. People who do have strokes in the temporal lobe, and not just strokes, that's my third point, and I'll get there in a minute. But people who have strokes in the temporal lobe do tend to have hallucinations. These are not mental, they are neurological, because it happens from a physical condition, which is a stroke. So it very well could have been a stroke. The third thing it could be temporal lobe epilepsy. Now, I've said this before on my channel. I have temporal lobe epilepsy, and I have seen God, and I have heard God. Believe me, I have. But, and this is the biggest reason I don't believe anymore. Not the only reason, but the biggest. If I can't make head nor hair of when my epilepsy is acting up and when I am getting real revelation from quote unquote God, why should I believe? Okay, so those are the three things it could be, you know, and this is just, and sometimes you do go blind. If you've had a temporal lobe stroke, you can go temporarily blind sometimes. That also happens, okay? It's not, this is a well-documented phenomenon, you know. I mean, it probably didn't make any sense back then, which is why they always wanted supernatural explanations for everyone, but it's well documented. But the real thing that makes me think he had a temporal lobe stroke is that he got his sight back. So it was a temporary loss of sight. Okay? Temporary loss of sight. That happens with temporal lobe strokes. You can have, hey, Dr. Mark Warner, you can have a temporary loss of sight with temporal lobe strokes. Happens all the time. Well documented. Moving on. Verse 10. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Yeah, that's another thing, Dr. Mark Warner. Yeah. And Acts is dubious as it is, so, I mean, it's not really. But assuming this happened, we can, you know, uh, oh, Mark, you missed that part. He asked the high priest in Jerusalem if he could go to Damascus and drag back anybody following Jesus in Damascus back to Jerusalem. I'm like, what the fuck? The high priest has no authority in Damascus. So why the fuck is Saul even going to the high priest? I asked that earlier. You you just came in, so you missed that one. Yeah, I mean, come on, it doesn't make sense. Um, so anyway, okay. Um, also, hallucinations, they can be visual hallucinations, they can be auditory hallucinations, they can happen together. They can also be olfactory hallucinations. I mean, there are all sorts of, it's okay, Mark. There are all, just about any sense you have, you can have a hallucination. Okay? It's fine, Mark. Don't worry about it. So, verse 13. Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. Holy people, really? Christians aren't the holy people. Yeah, that's another thing. The high priest was always of the Sadducees. So if Paul was a Pharisee, why would he be working for the Sadducees? They hated each other. It doesn't make sense. I've already covered hallucinations and psychotic breaks. Um, yeah, so maybe he was nuts. Yeah, Mark, I also covered that earlier. If it wasn't for Paul, Christianity would probably still be part of Judaism. Anyway, moving on. Um, all right. So, anyway, um, the Christians were never the holy people. God only refers to the Jews as holy people. What the fuck are these people talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Only the Jews are referred to as the holy people, not the Christians. Yeah, and that's another thing. He's the only one who even had a hair of a chance of being in communication with the real live Jesus in the New Testament. And he says he got everything from visions. Isn't that lovely? You know, if Jesus supposedly lived We're supposed to ignore everything about the disciples who supposedly lived with Jesus, walked with Jesus, heard Jesus preach, yada, 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 and we're supposed to forego what the disciples said who lived with Jesus and heard Jesus and blah, blah, blah. We're supposed to forego this all for delusion and hallucinations. Yeah, makes sense. Definitely makes sense. Verse 14. And he has come here, talking about Saul, and he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name. Again, what do the chief priests have to do with anything? They don't have any power in Damascus. Their power stops at Jerusalem. If you, I mean, seriously, their power stops at Jerusalem. Hey, Atheist Edge, what's up? So, verse 15. But the Lord said to Ananias, Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. I just want to say that according to scholars, Acts was written by the same dude who wrote Luke, who was not Luke, by the way. Oh, thank you, Atheist Edge. Thank you very much. You know what? I have not watched that live stream. What's it called again? I need to go watch it. All right. Anyway, written by the same person who wrote Luke, who, by the way, wasn't Luke. So in Luke, the person who was ascribed Luke by later church fathers, like Eusebius, he was actually a disciple of Paul. So even if we buy that this Luke character wrote the Gospel of Luke and wrote Acts, we're still not talking about the disciple Luke. I mean, even if you buy that shit, we're still not talking about the disciple Luke. We're talking about a disciple of Paul. So, of course, he's going to make his idol look like the shit. Because that's what disciples do. Verse 17. Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Okay, so, and let me go ahead and read this. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. Okay, so let's go ahead. We already know that with a temporal lobe stroke, you can regain your sight. It seems to me the most plausible explanation is that Saul just regained his sight and his disciple was like, oh, it was Magic Man. Thank you, Atheist Church. And remember, it was a disciple of Paul, not a disciple of Jesus, who wrote those. All right, moving on. At once, he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. All right. This is also true, Mark, which makes you also wonder how accurate this could be. You know, and like I said, you know, somebody's going to talk up their hero. You know, I mean, it just happens. You know, it is human nature. You're just going to talk up your heroes. That's all it is. It doesn't mean a thing. Verse 21. All those who heard him were astonished and asked, isn't he the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who call on this name? And hasn't he come here to take them as prisoners to the chief priests? Yet Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Messiah. Bullshit. Or a temporal lobe seizure, Atheist Edge. Or a temporal lobe seizure. I have temporal lobe epilepsy, so I know this quite well. Doesn't take a genius to figure this stuff out. And people who do have temporal lobe epilepsy tend to be hyper religious. Also, that's where my hyper religiosity came from. Exactly, Mark. Exactly. So, I mean, if Jesus' closest followers were at the temple, why didn't the chief priest just say, "Hey, you need to go arrest James at Jerusalem"? Because he had that power. Like I said, the 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 chief priest's power stops at the wall of Jerusalem. He doesn't have any power outside of Jerusalem. It's like, what the fuck, man? I have a video on that, Mark. So, verse 23, after many days had gone by, there was a conspiracy among the Jews to kill him, but Saul learned of their plan. Day and night they kept close watch on the city gates in order to kill him. But his followers took him by night and lowered him in a basket through an opening in the wall. And by the way, it is very unlikely that Paul was a Pharisee. And if you want, I really don't know much about the Pharisees, but if you want to learn about that, it's one of my early ones, Mark. It's called God is a Drug. But if you do want to learn why it's highly doubtful that Paul was a Pharisee, go to Tovia Singer's channel. This is also true. They would have quoted it in Hebrew or Aramaic, depending on the verse. I agree with you there. Paul was a basket case. But anyway, how did he not break the basket? Seriously. This doesn't make any sense. You know what it sounds like? Seriously, for a minute? It seriously sounds like they stole Rahab's story from the Old Testament or the Tanakh. Okay? Seems like they stole Rahab's story from the Tanakh and just added a basket. That's what it sounds like to me. Verse 26, when he came to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he really was a disciple. That's because he was not a disciple. He was an apostle. Okay? And another reason they wouldn't let him join, they already had 12 disciples. Because for some reason, they decided after Judas hung himself that, they decided for whatever reason after Judas hung himself, they still had to have 12 disciples. So they cast lots. In other words, they gambled, which is a no-no. And Matthias was chosen as the 12th disciple. Read it for yourselves. Read it for yourselves. So anyway, and, this doesn't really make any sense, does it? It just doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, why would I expect anything to make any sense? Seriously, why would I expect anything to make any sense? Because why would I expect anything in this book to make any sense? Seriously. Because you can't trust it historically. We already know that. It could be, Mark. I think the whole damn New Testament is a myth, but that's just me. It could be, but it also could be that they also, already chose a 12th disciple. Like I said, Matthias. That's in the early part of Acts after Judas hung himself. So, anyway. Oh, speaking of which, have you heard that Matt Powell has a big banana in his yard called Dr. Peel? It's ridiculous. Anyway, verse 27. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles. He told them how Saul, on his journey, had seen the Lord and that the Lord had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he had preached fearlessly in the name of Jesus. Okay, so by this time, that could also be Mark. That could also be. Because we really don't know what the shit happened. Seriously, we don't. This could all be make-believe. And how does Barnabas know this? At this time, things traveled by way of mouth, by way of foot. So how does Barnabas know this? So Saul stayed, verse 28. So Saul stayed with them and moved about freely in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. He talked and debated with the Hellenistic Jews, but they tried to kill him. When the believers learned of this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. Why wouldn't they send him to Tarsus? That's where he lived. That's where he lived. Why wouldn't they send him to Tarsus? Verse 31. Then the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria enjoyed a time of peace and was strengthened, living in the fear of the Lord and encouraged by the Holy Spirit. It increased in numbers. And that's the conversion of Paul. Chapter 9 does go on, but I don't think I'm going to cover it. I'll cover it in my Saturday live stream when I get to it. Okay, so think about this. The high priest in Jerusalem is first of all a Sadducee. Sadducees hate the Pharisees. Okay? Keep that in mind. They're rival sects. Okay? So why would a Pharisee, and I don't believe for a moment that Paul was a Pharisee, but let's go with it for a moment. Why would a Pharisee go to a Sadducee and say, hey, look, I want to go to Damascus and see if any of these motherfuckers are there. And if they are, I want to drag them back to Jerusalem. As I've already told you, the chief priests, of whom the high priest was one, did not have any authority in Damascus. So why would Paul ask permission of the high priest to go to Damascus to bring back Jesus nuts? It doesn't make sense. And then second of all, the high priest was still in Jerusalem. So it doesn't make any sense, if the high priest was still in Jerusalem, that the quote unquote church in Judea, in which Jerusalem was a part, it doesn't make any sense that the church in Judea would have had peace and contentment if the high priest was so determined to root them out. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, what else do you need? If he existed, I would have to agree. I would have to agree, Mark, if he existed. And because it seems that Paul's brand of quote unquote Christianity isn't remotely what Jesus established or wanted to establish. Jesus himself said, I did not come to abolish the law. Didn't come to abolish the law. Not one jot or tittle will pass until all of these things are fulfilled. What's he talking about? He's talking about the law. So if Jesus himself didn't come to abolish the law, how the hell does Paul come to the conclusion, we don't need the law? This is why I don't think he was a Pharisee, by the way, because a Pharisee would never say that. A Pharisee would never say that. Even if he was converted to this nonsense, a Pharisee would not say that. So, you got to think about these things. And having faith, because I was a Christian for 40 years. I was in this stupid fucking religion for 40 years. And it when you look at it, when you really, really look at it, and when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. I know what you were saying, Mark. And yes, people, Christianity is a mystery religion. They don't like being called that, but that's exactly what they are. Every one of them, from Catholics to Protestants to Jehovah's Witnesses and everything in between. They're, it's all a mystery religion. That's all it is. And I'll get into mystery religions later. I got a ton of crap I want to get through on my channel. I'm probably never going to get through all of it, but hey, it's the way things go. Yeah, me too, Lisa. And now I'm trying to educate people, and some people have their blinders on, and they're never going to Exactly, Mark. In fact, it's anathema to Jews. It is anathema to Jews. Jews look at that. Jews look at that and they're like, these people are friggin' nuts. Anyway, that's all I gotta say for today. Also the whole thing about God being the father and a mortal woman being a mother, that's pagan too, because we can look at Hercules. Zeus was his father, and he had a mortal mother, and while I'm on this topic, Disney's version of Hercules is not the Greek myth of Hercules. Okay, it's because the Greek myth is not really a G-rated myth, so Disney had to play with it to make it G-rated, just so you know. I know, right, Lisa? So funny. So fucking funny. Yeah, and they can't even make up their minds. They can't even make up their minds, Mark. One time, yeah, you do this. Next time, no, you don't do this. What the fuck? What are we supposed to do? And hey, Marianne, in one place we're supposed to do this, in another place we're not supposed to do this. What the fuck? What the hell are we supposed to do? Yeah, Mark, and he had the audacity to say to us to boast in one of his letters that he withstood Peter because Peter was a hypocrite. Well, doesn't that just say that Paul's a hypocrite? I mean, if you're acting Jewish to the Jews and pagan to the pagans, isn't that being a hypocrite? Oh, my. You want me to go on with chapter 9? I can go on with chapter 9. I mean, if you really want me to. Anybody in the chat who wants me to go on with chapter 9, type Y. I can go on with chapter 9 if you want. It's no big deal. Oh, you read Mark, huh? How'd you like it? I'm sure you read it before, but, you know. All right, moving on with chapter 9. So we've covered Paul's conversion. So now we're going to something else. Verse 32 is Peter traveled about the country. So we've left Paul, now we're in Peter. Yeah, Mark, because Mark was the earliest. We already know that. Was the earliest. So we're moving on from Paul completely. As Peter traveled about the country, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydia. There he found a man named Aeneas who was paralyzed and had been bedridden for 8 years. Aeneas, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and roll up your mat. Immediately, Aeneas got up. All those who lived in Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Bullshit. Bullshit. Verse 36. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. Wow. You know, I don't think I would like having a name like Dorcas. Seriously. It just sounds too much like dork. Of course, I'm reading this in 21st century America, so what do I know? She was always doing good and helping the poor. Verse 37, about that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she got up. Okay. Why did he have to send everybody out of the room? Wouldn't it have made better sense to have witnesses? And how did the author of Acts, if there were no witnesses in the room when Peter raised Dorcas, how did he get the story? And how do we even know that Dorcas was dead? Again, this was in the 1st century. They didn't have things like we have today. I mean, seriously, it could be she wasn't dead. Occam's razor, as Atheist Church said. Okay, I lost my place. All right. Verse 41. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. Yeah, that's because she was never fucking dead in the first place. I mean, if this really happened, which I have my doubts, okay? But if this really happened, she wasn't dead. Okay? She wasn't dead. Nobody comes back from death. Verse 42. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 9. All right. So, first of all, we've got a naturalistic explanation for what Paul went through. It could be a seizure. It could, whether grand mal or temporal lobe, it could be a stroke. It could be a psychotic break. If this really happened, and again, I have my doubts, but if this really happened, we must Eliminate those three naturalistic explanations. We must, that is scientific integrity, people. Can't just say, oh, it's a miracle. No, we can't do that. I know Christians wanna, but don't work that way, people. Yeah, nevermore, me too. And I mean, post-bereavement hallucinations happen. And of course, this didn't happen with Paul, but it could very well have happened with Peter. That he hallucinated that Jesus rose from the dead. Hey, scapegoat. Um, so we've got naturalistic explanations. Dorcas wasn't dead because you can't come back from the dead. Nobody comes back from the dead. And so Dorcas wasn't dead. Yeah. Yeah, Mark. It's okay, scapegoat. We're happy to have you here. You're just gonna have to go into my debunk about Paul's conversion. It's an idiot story. Really, an idiot story. And I don't know how people believe this stuff. I mean, I used to, but the further and further I get away from Christianity, I just don't know. I have no clue how people can believe this stuff in the 21st century. Of course, I have an excuse. I was raised in it. But, some people don't have any excuses except that they want to believe in some kind of a hope that nobody has. Look, it's sad. People die. You go in the ground, okay? Or, you know, you're cremated, or, you know, whatever, whatever your culture dictates, you know, whatever the tradition is, But at any rate, we all die, period. We all die. And they want a way around that. Well, you know what? There is no way around it. Lisa, if they really studied it, do you think they would believe it? So anyway, like I said, this is a makeup session for Atheist Church, and like I said, I had a bitch of a migraine, and I just wasn't up to Atheist Church yesterday. So this is, a makeup session for that. But anyway, I think that'll do it for today. Um, for a lot of us, it is scapegoat. For a lot of us, it is. And then the only way to get out of it is to really use your brain and think about it. And then you'll come to realize it's fucking false. So hit that like button, press the subscribe button if you're not subscribed. Join if you'd like to join. Join if you'd like to become a member and join Lisa Irwin. You get to be on a banner and you get little perks, and you can join for as little as 99 cents. And so anyway, I will see you guys later. Have a great night and see you next time. Bye. Thanks for coming.